England, 1809. The worst storms are not the ones that shake the sky, but the ones that convince you there is nothing left worth holding on to. The night sky above Greymore Hall split open with violet lightning, illuminating the figure of a young woman standing on the rooftop balustrade in nothing but a soaked white nightgown. Eliza Brennan stood at the very edge of the stone ledge, her bare toes curled over the rain-slick surface, her wheat-coloured hair unbound and whipping violently in the wind. Far below, the courtyard stones waited in darkness. She did not want to look down. She did not want to think, but thinking was all she had left. The rain fell in sheets, cold enough to numb, heavy enough to drown. Thunder rolled across the Derbyshire countryside, shaking the ancient manor to its foundations. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself, trembling not from cold, but from exhaustion, so profound it had settled into her bones. 26 years old, and she felt ancient, hollow, used up. How had it come to this? The question flickered through her mind as lightning flashed again, closer this time, illuminating the Gothic peaks and stone chimneys of Greymore Hall. This place had been her prison for 4 years. 4 years of waking before dawn, of scrubbing floors until her hands bled, of swallowing insults and humiliation and rage until she forgot what it felt like to stand upright. 4 years of watching the debt her father supposedly owed grow larger with each passing month, no matter how hard she worked. Another memory surfaced, unbidden. Her brother Victor, tall and laughing, lifting her onto a chestnut mare when she was 8 years old. His hands steadying her, his voice encouraging. "You are braver than you know, Eliza. Never forget that." She had believed him then, before he disappeared 3 months before their father died, before rumours of desertion and execution reached her ears, before she was left utterly and completely alone in the world. 3 years. 3 years of believing Victor was dead, of carrying that grief alongside everything else. The wind gusted, nearly knocking her off balance. Eliza gasped, arms pinwheeling, but she caught herself, her heart hammered against her ribs. Not yet. She had not decided yet. Behind her, through the roof access door she had left open, the warmth and light of Greymore Hall spilled out into the storm. Inside, Earl Edmund Carlisle would be in his study, sipping brandy, satisfied with the evening's entertainment. The memory of what had happened just hours before burned through her mind. The small dinner party, 6 local gentry families seated around the polished mahogany table in the dining hall. Eliza serving silently, as always, her movements careful, her eyes downcast. She knew better than to draw attention, but the Earl had other plans. "Stop!" His voice had cut through the polite conversation like a blade. All heads turned. Eliza froze, silver serving platter trembling in her hands. The Earl rose slowly from his seat at the head of the table, his cold blue eyes fixed on her. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption, but I fear we have a thief among us." The room went silent. Eliza's stomach dropped. "Earlier this afternoon," the Earl continued, his tone dripping with false regret, "a valuable silver brooch, a family heirloom, went missing from my late wife's jewellery box. I conducted a search of the servants' quarters and found it hidden beneath this woman's mattress." Eliza's voice came out barely above a whisper. "My lord, I did not." Silence. The word cracked through the air. The guests stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Lady Whitmore clutched her pearls. Mr. Henderson shook his head slowly. Mrs. Finch, the elderly cook who had been Eliza's only source of kindness in this God-forsaken place, stepped forward from the doorway to the kitchens. "Your lordship, Miss Brennan would never—" "Mrs. Finch, you are dismissed. Effective immediately. Leave this house within the hour." The old woman's face went white. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but did not let them fall. Not in front of these people. Not in front of him. After the guests departed, whispering among themselves, the Earl had dragged Eliza to his study. No witnesses, no servants within earshot. He locked the door. "You think you can embarrass me? Make me look weak by refusing to work harder, To pay faster. His breath reeked of brandy and tobacco. You are nothing. The worthless daughter of a worthless man who drank and gambled away every shred of dignity your family ever had. My father's debt was £180, Eliza managed, her voice shaking but defiant. I have worked 4 years. I have earned far more than... The blow came fast. His open palm struck her cheekbone with enough force to snap her head sideways. Pain exploded across her face. She stumbled backward, colliding with the desk. You will work until I say the debt is paid. You will work until I decide you have earned the air you breathe under my roof. He hit her again. And again. Eliza stopped counting. When he finally stepped back, breathing hard, she crumpled to the floor. Blood trickled from her split lip. Her ribs screamed with every shallow breath. Get out of my sight. She crawled. Actually crawled across the floor to the door, fumbled it open, and fled. Now, hours later, standing on the rooftop with the storm raging around her, Eliza could still feel his hands, could still hear his voice. The hematomas on her face throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Her ribs ached with every breath, but worse than the physical pain was the hollow certainty that this would never end. She would die here, one way or another. Worked to death, beaten to death, or broken so thoroughly that nothing of Eliza Brennan would remain. Perhaps it was better to choose. She looked up at the roiling black clouds, rain streaming down her face, mixing with tears she had finally allowed to fall. Victor, she whispered to the storm, to the ghost of her brother, to whatever might be listening. I am so tired. Her toes inched forward, and then, impossibly, she heard a voice. Step back from the edge. Eliza's head whipped around. Through the rain and darkness, she saw a figure emerging onto the rooftop. A tall man in a drenched black coat, dark hair plastered to his head, eyes wide with alarm. He moved toward her carefully, hands raised. Please, he said, voice urgent but calm. Step back. Let me help you. She did not recognize him. Eliza shook her head, confusion cutting through her despair. Who? My name is Julian Merrick. I am the Duke of Westfield. I do not know why you are here, but I know you do not truly want to do this. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face. Green eyes, strong features, no cruelty in them. Only concern. You do not know anything about me, Eliza said, her voice breaking. Then tell me. He took another careful step closer. The rain poured between them. Tell me why. But before she could answer, her foot slipped on the wet stone. She gasped, arms flailing, balance lost. For one terrifying heartbeat, she was falling. Then strong hands seized her wrist, her waist, yanking her backward with desperate strength. She collided with a solid chest, and arms wrapped around her, pulling her away from the edge and down onto the safer flat section of the roof. They both collapsed onto the slick tiles, gasping. I have you, Julian breathed, his arms still locked around her. You are safe. I have you. Eliza's vision blurred. Shock, pain, exhaustion, all of it crashed over her at once. The last thing she registered before darkness claimed her was the sound of his heartbeat beneath her ear and the feeling of being held as though she mattered. When Julian lifted the unconscious woman into his arms and carried her down from the rooftop, his face was set with fury. He kicked open the door to the main hall, water streaming from both of them, and found Earl Edmund Carlisle standing at the base of the grand staircase with an expression of annoyed surprise. Your Grace, what on earth? What is her name? Julian demanded. The Earl's eyes flicked to the woman in Julian's arms, and something cold crossed his features. That is Eliza Brennan, a servant in my household. She is disturbed, unstable. Attempted to flee punishment for theft earlier this evening. I apologize that you were troubled. Troubled. Julian descended the remaining stairs, his voice dropping to something deadly. This woman was on your rooftop in the middle of a storm. She is covered in bruises. Fresh bruises. She is clumsy and... Do not insult my intelligence, Greymore. Julian shifted Eliza's weight, cradling her more securely. Her head lolled against his shoulder, unconscious and soaked to the bone. He could see the swelling on her cheekbone, the split lip, the finger-shaped marks on her arms. Rage coiled in his gut. I came here tonight to collect the £800 you owe me from cards last week. Consider that debt forgiven. In exchange, this woman is now under my protection. I am taking her with me. The Earl's face flushed dark red. You cannot simply abscond with my property. She owes a legal debt of... If you attempt to stop me or pursue this matter, I will make it my personal mission to investigate every aspect of your affairs, Greymore. Do I make myself clear? For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then the Earl stepped aside, his jaw clenched with barely suppressed fury. Julian carried Eliza out into the storm, to his waiting carriage, and did not look back. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. Thank you for your support. Consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it confusion and fear. Eliza opened her eyes to find herself in a room she did not recognize. Soft morning light filtered through tall windows draped in ivory silk. The bed beneath her was impossibly comfortable, the linens fine and clean-smelling. A fire crackled in an ornate marble fireplace. Everything was warm, beautiful, foreign. Terror seized her chest. Where was she? What had happened? She sat up too quickly, and pain lanced through her ribs. Eliza gasped, pressing a hand to her side, and the memories came flooding back. The rooftop, the storm, the man who had pulled her back from the edge. The Duke. Easy, easy now. A gentle female voice spoke from a chair beside the bed. Eliza turned to find a woman in her late 20s watching her with kind hazel eyes. She wore an elegant morning dress of deep plum, her auburn hair arranged in a fashionable style. You are safe, Miss Brennan. Please do not try to move too quickly. Your injuries need time to heal. Who are you? Eliza's voice came out hoarse, damaged from screaming into the storm. Where am I? I am Lady Helena Thornbury, cousin to the Duke of Westfield. You are in Westfield Manor, in Derbyshire. You have been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days. Eliza's mind reeled. She looked down at herself and realized she was wearing a clean white nightgown that was not her own, and her hair had been washed and braided. Someone had tended to her while she slept. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. I need to leave. Eliza threw back the covers, ignoring the sharp protest from her ribs. Her bare feet touched the plush carpet. I cannot be here. He will come for me. He will... The Earl of Greymore will not touch you again. The door opened, and Julian Merrick entered, his expression serious but calm. He was taller than Eliza remembered, perhaps 31 or 32 years of age, with dark hair and those piercing green eyes that had been the last thing she saw before losing consciousness. He wore a simple white shirt and dark waistcoat, no jacket. You are under my protection now, Miss Brennan. You will never return to Greymore Hall. Eliza stared at him, her breath coming fast. You do not understand. I owe him money, a legal debt. He can force me to... No one will force you to do anything ever again. Julian's voice was firm, but not unkind. He remained near the door, as if sensing that coming closer might frighten her. I give you my word. But words meant nothing. Eliza had learned that lesson thoroughly. She moved toward the window, calculating. 2nd floor, but there was a trellis covered in ivy. She could climb down, run, disappear before anyone realized. Miss Brennan, please. Lady Helena rose from her chair, hands outstretched in a placating gesture. You are in no condition to go anywhere. You have 3 cracked ribs, severe bruising, and you collapsed from exhaustion. At least allow yourself to heal before making any decisions. Eliza's hands were shaking. She pressed them against the window glass, feeling trapped, cornered. Every instinct screamed at her to flee. Nothing good came from accepting help. There was always a price. What do you want from me? She whispered. The question hung in the air. Julian exchanged a glance with his cousin before answering. Nothing. I want nothing from you except the truth about what happened at Greymore Hall. Over the next hour, with Lady Helena sitting quietly supportive and Julian listening from a respectful distance, Eliza told them everything. The words came haltingly at first, then faster, spilling out as if a dam had broken inside her. Her father, Viscount Brennan, had been a good man once, educated, kind, devoted to his children. But after Eliza's mother died when she was 14, something in him shattered. He turned to gambling and drink, seeking oblivion. By the time Eliza was 22, the estate was gone, sold to pay debts. Her brother Victor, 3 years older and a captain in His Majesty's army, had been her only remaining family. Victor disappeared 3 months before our father died, Eliza said, her voice barely audible. She sat on the edge of the bed now, too exhausted to stand. There were rumours of desertion. Some said he fled to avoid a court-martial. Others said he was executed in Scotland. I never received any official word. I waited for letters that never came. After a year of silence, I accepted that he must be dead. Julian's expression was difficult to read. I am truly sorry, Eliza continued. When her father died 4 years ago, Earl Greymore appeared at the funeral with documents claiming the Viscount owed him £180 from a private loan. Eliza, alone and with nowhere to turn, had no way to pay. The Earl made her an offer: work in his household as a servant until the debt was satisfied. I agreed because I had no choice, Eliza said bitterly. I thought perhaps a year, maybe 2, but every month he added interest. Then fees for my room and board, penalties for imagined infractions. The £180 became 2,000. No matter how hard I worked, the number only grew larger. Lady Helena's face had gone pale. That is monstrous. The work was brutal, Eliza went on, staring at her hands. Calluses marked her palms, scars from burns and cuts decorated her fingers. 16 hours a day, sometimes more. Scrubbing, cooking, serving. I was not allowed to speak unless spoken to. If I made any mistake, any at all, he would withhold meals or lock me in the cellar. And then, over the past year, he began to... She faltered, unable to continue that particular thread. Julian's jaw clenched. Did he strike you before last night? Yes. Not frequently at first. A slap here, a shove there. But it escalated, and I had nowhere to run. No money, no family, no one who would believe me over an earl. Eliza looked up at Julian, searching his face. Why did you come to Greymore that night? I went to collect a gambling debt. Your earl lost £800 to me at cards the previous week. I went to demand payment. A bitter smile crossed Julian's face. I suppose I should thank the man's weakness for games of chance. Otherwise I would not have been there to... He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Silence settled over the room, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, Julian straightened. Miss Brennan, with your permission, I would like to investigate the Earl's financial affairs and the legitimacy of this debt he claims you owe. I have contacts in London, solicitors who can examine the original documents. If, as I suspect, this debt has been fabricated or illegally inflated. No, the word came out sharp, panicked. Eliza stood again despite the pain, shaking her head vehemently. Please no. If you investigate him, if you accuse him publicly, he will retaliate. He will destroy what little reputation I have left. He will paint me as a liar, a seductress who tried to manipulate a duke. Society will believe him, not me. And even if they do not, I will be paraded through scandal as a victim, pitied and whispered about for the rest of my life. I cannot bear it. Please. Julian looked as though he wanted to argue, but something in Eliza's expression stopped him. Very well, he said quietly. I will wait. But I will conduct some discreet inquiries. And when you are ready, if you ever decide you want to pursue justice, I will help you. That is my promise. Eliza nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Over the following days, Eliza remained at Westfield Manor in a state of perpetual unease. Lady Helena was unfailingly kind, bringing books and sitting with her in comfortable silence. The household servants treated her with respect that felt alien after years of degradation. But Eliza could not shake the feeling that this was temporary, that at any moment the illusion would shatter, and she would wake back in the cold servants' quarters at Greymore. The nightmares were relentless. Every night she dreamed of the Earl's hands, his voice, the locked cellar. She would wake gasping, disoriented, certain she was back in that hell. More than once, Lady Helena found her trying to climb out the window in a state of half-sleep, convinced she needed to escape. Julian kept his distance, sensing perhaps that his presence unsettled her. But Eliza would catch glimpses of him in the hallways, in the library, always watching with an expression she could not decipher. Concern, yes, but something else. Something that made her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries. Through careful questioning of his banking contacts in London, Julian learned that the Earl of Greymore was indeed financially ruined. The man owed money to half the gentlemen in Derbyshire and had taken loans from increasingly questionable sources. He maintained the appearance of wealth through manipulation and extortion, though Julian could find no concrete proof yet. Not enough to bring formal charges, not enough to protect Eliza permanently. It gnawed at him. One afternoon in her second week at Westfield, Eliza was sitting in the morning room attempting to read when she heard a commotion in the entrance hall. Voices, one of them achingly familiar. She set down her book and moved to the doorway just as Lady Helena entered with an elderly woman in a worn travelling cloak. "Eliza, dear girl!" Mrs. Finch rushed forward, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Oh, thank the Lord! You are alive! You are safe!" Eliza felt something crack open inside her chest. "Mrs. Finch, how did you—" "I heard through the other servants that you were here at Westfield. I walked from the village. I had to see you, had to know you were truly all right." The old woman took Eliza's hands in hers, examining her face with obvious distress at the fading bruises. "That monster! That absolute monster! I should have done more. I should have protected you." "You tried," Eliza whispered. "You were the only one who was ever kind to me." Julian appeared in the doorway, observing the reunion. He cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Finch, I presume." The cook turned, suddenly aware she was in the presence of a duke. She attempted an awkward curtsy. "Your Grace, I apologize for the intrusion. I only wanted to—" "You are welcome here." Julian's voice was warm. "In fact, if you are in need of a position, my kitchen is in want of an experienced cook. The previous one retired last month, and my current staff is struggling. Would you consider the role? The salary is £40 per annum, with your own room and full board." Mrs. Finch stared at him as though he had spoken in a foreign language. "Your Grace, I would be honoured, truly honoured." "Then it is settled." Julian nodded. "Lady Helena will show you to your quarters. Welcome to Westfield Manor, Mrs. Finch." After Mrs. Finch departed with Helena, chattering excitedly, Eliza found herself alone with Julian for the first time since that night on the rooftop. She turned to him, searching for words adequate to the moment. "Thank you," she finally said. For her. For everything. Julian met her gaze, and for a heartbeat, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Or the first fragile thread of trust. "You are welcome, Miss Brennan," he said softly. Then he turned and left before she could say anything more. That night, Eliza cried for the first time since childhood. Not from pain or fear, but from relief. And as she finally drifted into a dreamless sleep, she allowed herself to wonder, just for a moment, what it might feel like to be truly free. 6 weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo that Eliza had never experienced before. She remained at Westfield Manor, occupying the same comfortable guest room, taking meals with Lady Helena, and slowly healing both in body and spirit. The bruises faded from purple to yellow to nothing. Her ribs stopped aching with every breath. She began to sleep through most nights without waking in terror. But the whispers had started. Eliza first noticed it during a Sunday service at the small parish church that served the local families. She sat in the Westfield pew beside Lady Helena, acutely aware of the eyes that followed her every movement. After the service, as they walked through the churchyard, she overheard fragments of conversation that made her stomach clench. 6 weeks, can you imagine? Living under his roof, unmarried. They say she was a servant at Greymore. What kind of arrangement is this really? The Duke is a good man, but even good men can be led astray by a pretty face and a sad story. Lady Helena's grip on Eliza's arm tightened, but she said nothing until they were safely in the carriage heading back to Westfield. Then she sighed. I am sorry you had to hear that. Country gossip is a vicious thing. They are right to talk, Eliza said quietly, staring out at the rolling green hills. My presence here is irregular. It compromises your cousin's reputation as well as my own. That evening, Helena brought the matter to Julian over dinner. Eliza had been invited to join them, another irregularity that fed the rumours. She sat at the polished mahogany table feeling desperately out of place, despite the kindness of her hosts. Julian, we need to address the situation, Helena said, setting down her wineglass with deliberate care. The local families are beginning to speculate about Miss Brennan's prolonged stay. For her sake and yours, we should consider presenting her as a distant cousin, visiting while recovering from an illness. It would quiet the talk. Julian looked to Eliza, his green eyes questioning. What do you think, Miss Brennan? Eliza had spent the afternoon wrestling with this very question. She set down her fork and met his gaze directly. I appreciate the suggestion, Lady Helena. Truly, but I cannot accept it. I have spent 4 years living a lie, hiding the truth of what was being done to me, pretending everything was acceptable when it was not. I will not build a new life on another falsehood, no matter how well-intentioned. A smile flickered across Julian's face, gone almost before it appeared. I understand completely. Then we need a different solution, one that allows you to remain here with dignity and independence. He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. My library is in desperate need of organization. 3 generations of Merricks accumulated books without any coherent system. There are over 3,000 volumes spread across 2 floors, many of them rare or valuable, and not one of them properly catalogued. I need someone educated, detail-oriented, and trustworthy to undertake the project. Eliza's heart began to beat faster. She understood what he was offering. The position would come with a salary of £30 per annum, Julian continued. You would have your own quarters in the East Wing, where the senior household staff reside. The work would be entirely at your own pace, and you would report only to me. Does this arrangement interest you, Miss Brennan? For a long moment, Eliza could not speak. £30 per year was a respectable salary for a woman in such a position. Her own quarters meant independence, privacy, safety. And the work itself, organizing books, engaging with literature and knowledge, sounded like paradise compared to scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots. Yes, she whispered. Then, louder, yes, Your Grace. It interests me very much. Thank you. I accept with gratitude. Excellent. Then we shall begin tomorrow. The library at Westfield Manor was magnificent and utterly chaotic. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves constructed of dark oak, connected by a spiral iron staircase. Tall windows overlooked the south gardens. Leather armchairs sat beside reading tables piled high with volumes. Books were stacked on every available surface, shoved into shelves sideways, piled on the floor in towers that threatened to topple. Eliza stood in the doorway that first morning, overwhelmed and delighted in equal measure. I apologize for the state of things, Julian said from behind her. He carried a leather-bound ledger and several pencils. My grandfather was a collector, with no regard for order. My father made it worse. I am afraid I have not improved matters. It is wonderful, Eliza breathed. She moved into the room, running her fingers along the spines of books as she passed. Philosophy, history, poetry, botanical studies, atlases, novels in English and French and Latin. Your Grace, some of these are extraordinary. This is a first edition of Milton's Paradise Lost, and this is a complete set of Hume's History of England. Julian watched her with an expression of barely concealed pleasure. You know books, then. My father educated me before. Eliza trailed off, old pains surfacing. Before he lost himself, he believed daughters deserved the same intellectual preparation as sons. He taught me literature, history, Latin, French. We would spend hours in his study discussing philosophy and debating ideas. It was the happiest time of my life. Then you are perfectly suited to this work. Julian handed her the ledger. I thought you might create a cataloguing system. Note the title, author, subject, condition, whatever seems useful. I will assist when I can, though I confess my knowledge is superficial compared to yours. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Eliza would arrive at the library each morning after breakfast and work until late afternoon, creating careful lists, organizing by subject and author, setting aside volumes that needed repair. Julian joined her most days, initially under the pretense of helping, but increasingly for the conversation. They talked about everything. Eliza rediscovered parts of herself she thought had been beaten out of existence. Her opinions on literature, her thoughts about history, her fierce intelligence that had been forced into silence for so long. Julian was well-read but not pedantic, curious and willing to debate without condescension. I cannot agree with Hobbes, Eliza said one afternoon, shelving a worn copy of Leviathan. His view of human nature as fundamentally selfish and brutish feels incomplete. Surely there is evidence of genuine altruism, of people acting against their own interests for the good of others. Julian, seated at a nearby table making notes, looked up with interest. You do not believe humans are motivated primarily by self-preservation? I believe we are complex. Yes, self-preservation is a powerful instinct, but so is compassion. So is the desire for connection and meaning. Your own actions prove that, do they not? You helped me when there was no benefit to yourself, only risk. Perhaps I am the exception that proves Hobbes correct, Julian said lightly, but his eyes were serious. Or perhaps Hobbes was simply a pessimist who had seen too much of the worst in people. Eliza returned to the shelves, hiding a small smile. The conversations ranged from philosophy to poetry, from political theory to the merits of various novelists. Eliza argued passionately that Shakespeare's Hamlet was a fundamentally passive character who caused more harm through inaction than Macbeth caused through ambition. Julian countered that Hamlet's contemplative nature was itself a form of tragic heroism in a corrupt world. They debated for an hour, neither yielding, both enjoying themselves immensely. Mrs. Finch observed the growing connection with maternal satisfaction. She took to leaving trays of tea and Eliza's favourite lemon biscuits in the library each afternoon, often with a knowing smile that made Eliza blush. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Eliza began to change. Her posture straightened, the permanent defensive hunch of her shoulders easing. She began to look people in the eye again. When she smiled, it reached her eyes. Lady Helena remarked on it one evening, commenting that Eliza seemed more herself, though Helena had never known the woman Eliza used to be. Julian noticed everything. The way Eliza's face lit up when she discovered a particularly rare volume. The way she unconsciously tucked a strand of wheat-coloured hair behind her ear when concentrating. The way her voice grew animated when discussing ideas that mattered to her. He found himself inventing reasons to spend time in the library, bringing correspondence to answer there, claiming he needed to reference some volume or another. He was falling in love with her. Deeply, irrevocably in love. Not with the broken woman he had pulled from the rooftop, but with this brilliant, resilient, fascinating person who was emerging from years of trauma. He wanted to tell her, wanted to take her hands and confess everything he felt, but he did not, could not. She was still healing, still vulnerable, still dependent on his protection and generosity. Any declaration from him would carry the weight of obligation, of unequal power. She might feel compelled to accept out of gratitude or fear of losing her position. The thought sickened him. So Julian kept silent and loved her from a distance that felt like torture. The letters from Earl Greymore began arriving in the third week. The first was relatively restrained, formally requesting the return of Miss Eliza Brennan, who remains indebted to the sum of £1,847 and who departed my household unlawfully. Julian threw it in the fire. The second letter, arriving 4 days later, was more aggressive. Your Grace, I must insist you cease harbouring a woman who is legally bound to my service through unpaid debt. If you continue to refuse reasonable communication on this matter, I shall have no choice but to pursue legal remedies. Julian filed it in his desk drawer along with growing evidence. The third letter came a week after that, and the tone had shifted to barely veiled threats. It would be unfortunate if rumours were to circulate regarding the true nature of Miss Brennan's residence at Westfield Manor. Society takes a dim view of impropriety, particularly when it involves unmarried women of questionable character living under the protection of unmarried gentlemen. I trust you will reconsider your position before reputations are irreparably damaged. Julian read that one twice, fury building in his chest. Then he placed it with the others and locked the drawer. Let the Earl dig his own grave with words. Every threat was evidence. Every lie would be useful when the time came. And the time would come. Julian was certain of it. One evening, as golden autumn light slanted through the library windows, Eliza set down the book she had been cataloguing and looked at Julian with an expression of wonder. "I cannot remember the last time I felt this content," she said softly. "Is that strange? After everything that happened, after all I lost, to feel something approaching happiness seems almost wrong." Julian closed his own book and met her gaze. "It is not wrong. It is human. You deserve peace, Miss Brennan. You deserve every good thing." "I do not know if I believe that yet," Eliza admitted, "but I am beginning to hope I might. Someday." "That is enough," Julian said. "Hope is enough to start." Outside, the first leaves were beginning to fall, and somewhere in Greymore Hall, an earl was composing another furious letter that would go unanswered. But in the library at Westfield Manor, two people sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by thousands of books, and neither noticed the encroaching darkness. The summons came in early November, delivered by royal courier. Julian read the letter in his study with a frown that deepened with each line. Lady Helena, taking tea with Eliza in the drawing room, looked up when he entered. "Parliament?" she asked, reading his expression. "Parliament," Julian confirmed. "The Lords are convening for emergency sessions regarding the proposed trade reforms. My attendance is required, possibly for several weeks. I leave for London in 3 days." Eliza felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. Over the past weeks, she had grown accustomed to Julian's presence, to their daily conversations in the library, to the quiet comfort of knowing he was near. The thought of Westfield Manor without him felt suddenly bleak. "Miss Brennan," Julian said, turning to her with careful formality, "I wonder if you might consider accompanying me to London. You and Lady Helena both. I have a townhouse in Mayfair that is far too large for one person, and I confess the thought of leaving you here without proper protection from potential interference by the Earl troubles me. Additionally, there are rare bookshops in London you might find useful for your cataloguing work." Eliza's first instinct was to refuse. London meant society, meant exposure, meant the possibility of encountering people from her past when she was still the respectable daughter of a viscount, not a former servant with a scandalous history. But she saw the genuine concern in Julian's eyes, and something else. Hope, perhaps, that she would say yes. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "If Lady Helena agrees." Helena smiled. "I would be delighted. London in November is divine." Wham! The journey was planned with characteristic efficiency. Mrs. Finch remained at Westfield to manage the household in their absence, but spent an entire afternoon helping Eliza prepare a modest wardrobe appropriate for a woman in her position. Not the elaborate gowns of a debutante, but respectable day dresses and one evening gown in deep blue that brought out the grey in Eliza's eyes. "You will be wonderful, dear girl," Mrs. Finch said, fastening the last clasp on Eliza's travelling trunk. "Do not let anyone make you feel small. You have survived what would have destroyed lesser women. Hold your head high." London assaulted Eliza's senses the moment their carriage entered the city. The noise, the crowds, the endless rows of elegant townhouses and bustling streets overwhelmed her after months in the quiet countryside. Julian's Mayfair residence was a 4-story building of pale stone with black iron railings and window boxes that would bloom with flowers in spring. "Welcome," Julian said as they entered the marble-floored entrance hall. "Please, make yourselves comfortable. Miss Brennan, your quarters are on the 2nd floor, overlooking the garden. I hope you will find them adequate." Over the following days, Julian kept his promise to introduce Eliza carefully into select social circles. She was presented as his ward and librarian, a genteel young woman of good family who had fallen on difficult times. Most people accepted this explanation politely, though Eliza could see the curiosity in their eyes. At a small dinner party hosted by Lord and Lady Asherton, an elderly woman peered at Eliza across the table with sharp eyes. "Brennan, you said. Any relation to Viscount Brennan of Derbyshire?" Eliza's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "He was my father, Lady Asherton." "Ah." The woman's expression shifted to something resembling pity. "I recall your family. Such an unfortunate decline. Your father was quite brilliant before the drink took him. And your poor brother, killed in that dreadful desertion business. You have my sympathies, dear." Eliza could only nod, unable to trust her voice. Under the table, Lady Helena squeezed her hand in silent support. The true test came a week later, at an afternoon tea hosted by Lady Whitmore in her opulent drawing room. 20 women of various ages sat in clusters, sipping from delicate china cups and engaging in the sort of pointed conversation that masqueraded as pleasantry. Eliza recognized 3 women from her youth, before her father's decline, before everything fell apart. Miss Georgiana Hartwell approached with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Eliza Brennan, how extraordinary to see you here. We all thought you had, well, disappeared into obscurity after your father's passing. However did you come to be under the Duke of Westfield's protection?" The question was designed to wound, to imply impropriety. Eliza raised her chin. "His Grace was kind enough to offer me employment as his librarian. I am most grateful for the opportunity." "A librarian? How practical." Georgiana's tone dripped condescension. "I suppose we must all find our way in the world, mustn't we? Though some of us are more fortunate in our circumstances than others." Before Eliza could respond, another woman joined them, Miss Caroline Thornton, who had been Eliza's closest friend when they were girls. But Caroline's expression held no warmth, only uncomfortable pity. "Eliza, I was sorry to hear about your brother," Caroline said. "Such a tragedy, dying in disgrace like that. At least your father was spared knowing Victor's fate." "Actually," a third voice interjected, "that may not be entirely accurate." Miss Georgiana leaned in conspiratorially. "My cousin, the one who manages those dreadful estates in Scotland, swears he saw a man who looked remarkably like Victor Brennan working in a stable near the Highlands. This was only a few months ago. Of course, it could not possibly be him, could it? Though one does wonder what became of deserters who managed to avoid execution." The world seemed to tilt beneath Eliza's feet. Victor, alive. Possibly alive. Her hands began to shake so badly she had to set down her teacup before it shattered. "Miss Brennan, are you quite well?" Lady Whitmore asked, noticing her pallor. Excuse me." Eliza stood abruptly, needing air, needing space, needing to think. She made it to the terrace before her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto a stone bench, gasping. Julian found her there moments later. He must have been alerted by Lady Helena. He sat beside her, not touching, giving her space, but offering his presence. "Victor," Eliza whispered. "They said Victor might be alive. In Scotland. But that is impossible. He has been gone for 3 years. If he were alive, he would have written. He would have come for me. Unless..." Horror dawned. Unless he could not. Unless he is still hiding, still in danger. "Miss Brennan, look at me." Julian's voice was gentle but firm. She turned to face him, and he took her trembling hands in his. The touch was warm, grounding. "If there is any truth to this rumor, any chance at all that your brother lives, I will find him. I swear to you. As soon as my parliamentary duties conclude, I will go to Scotland myself and search. I will not stop until I have answers." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Julian's green eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Because you matter to me. Because your happiness matters to me. Because I would do anything in my power to bring your brother home, if it is possible." The moment stretched between them, charged with everything neither of them dared say. Then Julian released her hands and stood, restoring appropriate distance. Come, let us return to the townhouse. You need rest. The scandal erupted a week and a half later at the most glittering event of the London season. The Marquis of Pembroke's annual ball was legendary, held in a mansion that could accommodate 400 guests in its ballroom alone. Eliza had not wanted to attend, but Julian insisted she need not hide. She wore the blue evening gown Mrs. Finch had helped select, her hair arranged by Lady Helena's maid into an elegant style that made her look almost like the girl she had been 6 years ago. The ballroom was magnificent, ablaze with candlelight from 3 massive chandeliers. Orchestra music swelled as couples whirled across the polished floor. Eliza stood near one of the columns, trying to appear invisible, when a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Earl Edmund Carlisle pushed past the door attendants, his face flushed with wine or anger or both. He still wore his title, still commanded a certain respect by virtue of his rank, which explained how he forced entry despite lacking an invitation. His wild eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Eliza. Then he began to walk toward her with deliberate purpose. The room fell silent in ripples, conversations dying as guests noticed the Earl's advance. Eliza froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. This could not be happening. Not here. Not now. "There you are," the Earl announced loudly, his voice carrying across the hushed ballroom. "The lying little thief who has been poisoning the Duke of Westfield against me with her manipulations." 400 pairs of eyes turned to Eliza. "My lords and ladies," the Earl continued, addressing the entire room now, "I feel it is my duty to inform you that this woman, Miss Eliza Brennan, is a fugitive from legal debt. She stole valuable property from my household, invented vicious lies about abuse to gain sympathy, and has been unlawfully residing under the Duke's protection for months. She owes me £2,000 in documented debt, which she refuses to pay. She is a common criminal disguised in a borrowed gown." The whispers erupted like wildfire. Eliza heard them, saw the shocked faces, the judgmental stares, the delighted scandal in the eyes of people who thrived on others' misfortune. Julian appeared at her side so quickly she did not see him move. His face was carved from ice, his voice deadly calm. "Lord Greymore, you are not welcome here. Leave, now. I will not be silenced by a man who has been deceived by a manipulative—" "I said leave." Julian stepped forward, physically placing himself between Eliza and the Earl. "Or I will remove you myself." The Marquis of Pembroke materialized with several footmen. "Your Grace, please. Lord Greymore, you must depart immediately. You are disturbing my guests." The Earl was escorted out, protesting loudly, but the damage was complete and irreversible. The ball continued, but Eliza felt every stare, every whisper, every speculation about what was true and what was fabrication. Julian remained at her side, defiant and protective, but even his presence could not stop the poison from spreading. They left within the hour. In the carriage ride home, Eliza stared at her hands and felt shame so profound it threatened to suffocate her. Over the following days, the scandal consumed London society. Some believed the Earl's accusations. Others defended Julian and questioned Greymore's motives. But everyone talked. Everywhere Eliza went, she felt eyes following her, heard conversations stop when she entered rooms. Julian's reputation suffered too. Speculation about the true nature of their relationship ran rampant. Some suggested impropriety. Others painted him as a fool being manipulated. Either way, his honor was being dragged through scandal because of her. Eliza made her decision in the cold light of dawn, 3 days after the ball. She packed a small bag, left a letter for Julian explaining that she could not let him sacrifice everything for her, and slipped out of the Mayfair townhouse before anyone else woke. She had money saved from her salary. She had a destination. And she had, finally, the courage to walk away from something good before it destroyed the man who had saved her life. The public carriage rattled northward through grey November rain, carrying Eliza away from London, away from scandal, away from Julian. She sat wedged between a merchant's wife and a travelling clergyman, her small bag clutched on her lap, and tried not to think about the letter she had left on Julian's desk. She had written the truth, that she could not, in good conscience, continue to damage his reputation, that he deserved someone without her tainted past, someone whose presence would not invite whispers and speculation, that she was grateful beyond measure for everything he had done, but gratitude was not enough reason for him to sacrifice his standing in society. She asked him not to follow her, not to attempt contact. She released him from any obligation, real or imagined. The words had torn from her heart onto the page, and she sealed the letter knowing she would never see him again. The cottage sat at the edge of a small village in Derbyshire, perhaps 10 miles from Westfield Manor, but worlds away from the life she had briefly known there. It had belonged to her father, left to her and Victor in his will, along with what little remained after his debts were settled. Eliza had kept the key for years, more from sentiment than any practical purpose. She had not visited since his funeral 4 years ago. The structure was modest, just 3 rooms and a small kitchen, with a thatched roof that leaked in one corner. When Eliza pushed open the warped wooden door, dust and cobwebs greeted her. Sheets covered furniture her mother had chosen decades ago. The windows were filmed with grime, but it was hers, and it was safe, and it was far from the Earl and the scandal and the unbearable kindness in Julian's green eyes. She spent the first 2 days cleaning, scrubbing floors, washing windows, beating dust from curtains and linens. The physical labor was familiar, almost comforting after months of gentler work. Her hands remembered how to work until they ached. On the 3rd day, she walked to the village and inquired about work. The seamstress, a kind woman named Mrs. Crawford, needed assistance with mending and simple alterations. The pay was meagre, perhaps £1 a day when there was work to be had, but it would buy bread and coal. Eliza settled into a routine of quiet survival. She woke with the sun, worked until her eyes strained in the fading light, ate simple meals alone, and slept without dreams. She did not let herself think about Julian, about Lady Helena, about Mrs. Finch, or the library, or philosophical debates over tea. Thinking led to longing, and longing led to pain she could not afford. She was washing her one plate after a dinner of bread and cheese when the knock came. A boy from the village, breathless from running. "Mrs. Crawford says, can you come tomorrow extra early? Big order of mending from the manor house. Needs done quick." "Of course. Tell her I will be there at dawn." The boy nodded and dashed off. Eliza closed the door and returned to her washing, unaware that in London, Julian had just discovered her letter and was even now reading it with an expression of devastation that would have broken her heart. 3 weeks after Eliza's departure, Julian stood in a small village in the Scottish Highlands, cold rain soaking through his coat, and knocked on the door of a smithy. He had been searching for 17 days, following rumours and half-remembered sightings, interviewing innkeepers and stable masters, and anyone who might have seen a man matching Victor Brennan's description. The man who answered the door was perhaps 29, tall and lean with dark hair and Eliza's same grey-blue eyes. He wore a blacksmith's leather apron and regarded Julian with instant wariness. "Can I help you?" His accent was careful, scrubbed of regional markers. "Are you Victor Brennan?" The man's face went carefully blank. "I think you have the wrong person. My name is Thomas Crawford. Captain Victor Brennan of His Majesty's 52nd Regiment, reported as a deserter 3 years ago," Julian pressed. "Your sister Eliza believes you dead. She has been alone and unprotected for years because she thought she had no one left in the world. If you are who I believe you are, she needs to know you are alive." At Eliza's name, Victor's facade crumbled. He pulled Julian inside the smithy and closed the door. "How do you know my sister? Is she safe? Please, I have to know if she is safe." Julian told him everything. The rooftop, the years of abuse, the escape, the Earl's ongoing threats, the London scandal. Victor listened with growing horror and rage, his hands clenching into fists. "I sent her letters," Victor said hoarsely when Julian finished. 3 of them, in the first year. I used false names, sent them through intermediaries. She never responded. I thought perhaps she wanted nothing to do with a deserter, or that our father had turned her against me before he died. So I stopped trying. God forgive me. I stopped trying. "The Earl," Julian said with sudden certainty. He must have intercepted them. He controlled everything in her life. Victor slammed his fist against the workbench. I should have come for her anyway. I should have risked it. Tell me what happened. Why did you desert? The story poured out. Victor's commanding officer, Colonel Whitfield, had ordered the massacre of unarmed Scottish civilians suspected of harbouring rebels. Women, children, elderly. Victor refused the order, confronted Whitfield publicly, and fled when the colonel threatened him with immediate execution for insubordination. He had been in hiding ever since, unable to clear his name without evidence, unable to contact Eliza without putting her in danger by association with a wanted deserter. Whitfield is dead now, Victor finished bitterly. Killed in battle 2 years ago, but the desertion charge remains on my record. I cannot return to England without facing a noose. Julian's mind was already working through the problem. What if we could prove Whitfield was corrupt? Find witnesses to his crimes? I have connections in the War Office. If we can demonstrate that you refused an illegal order, that you were right to disobey, your name can be cleared. Hope flickered in Victor's expression, fragile and desperate. Is that truly possible? I will make it possible, Julian said. For your sister's sake, I will move heaven and earth if necessary. Fry. It took 11 days of intensive investigation, but Julian was a duke with resources and determination. He located 3 former soldiers from the 52nd Regiment who had also witnessed Whitfield's atrocities and been sickened by them. One had retired honourably, willing to testify. Another had deserted like Victor, but would speak if guaranteed clemency. The third had died, but his widow possessed letters describing the events in damning detail. Julian presented the evidence to contacts in the War Office, called in favours, and applied pressure in the way only a peer of his rank could. The response was grudging but official. Captain Victor Brennan's desertion charge was overturned posthumously for Colonel Whitfield, whose own record was now under review. Victor was free to return to England with honour restored. Come with me to Derbyshire, Julian urged as they prepared to leave Scotland. Your sister is there, alone in your father's cottage. She does not know you are alive. Imagine her joy when she sees you. Victor needed no further convincing. While Julian was in Scotland, Eliza's fragile peace shattered. She was mending a torn petticoat by candlelight one evening when she heard horses outside. 3 of them, approaching fast. Eliza's stomach dropped. She knew somehow before the pounding started on her door. Open up, Miss Brennan. We know you are in there. The Earl's voice. Eliza grabbed the kitchen knife from the table with shaking hands. She did not answer. The door crashed open. Earl Greymore entered with 2 large men Eliza did not recognize, hired muscle with cruel faces. The Earl smiled, and it was the same predatory expression from her nightmares. Did you truly think you could run from me? That I would allow you to escape your obligations and humiliate me in the process? He advanced into the room. You owe me a debt, girl, and I have come to collect. I owe you nothing, Eliza said, her voice steadier than she felt. She gripped the knife. My father's debt was £180. It was paid years ago through my labour. You have no legal claim on me. I have every claim. The Earl gestured to his men. Take her. We are returning to Greymore Hall, where she will resume her duties, and this time there will be no duke to interfere. When the first man lunged for her, Eliza did not hesitate. She slashed with the knife, catching him across the forearm. He howled, stumbling back. The second man grabbed for her, but Eliza twisted away, screaming as loudly as she could. Help! Someone help me! The Earl struck her across the face, the familiar explosion of pain. Eliza fell to her knees, but did not drop the knife. She slashed again blindly, felt resistance, heard cursing. Then a new voice boomed from the doorway. Step away from her, or I will shoot you where you stand. Mr. Pemberley, the elderly neighbour, stood in the doorway with a hunting rifle levelled at the Earl's chest. His hands were steady despite his age. I said, step away, Greymore. I know who you are, and I know what you have done. The girl has told me. Now you will leave her be, or I will put a ball through your black heart and sleep sound tonight knowing I have done England a service. The Earl's face contorted with rage, but he was not foolish enough to test an armed man. He gestured sharply to his men. "This is not over, Brennan. I will return with the magistrate. You assaulted my men. You will hang for it." They fled into the night. Mr. Pemberley lowered his rifle only when the sound of hooves faded completely. Then he turned to Eliza, who was trembling violently on the floor. "Come, child. You cannot stay here alone. You will sleep at my house tonight, and tomorrow I am sending word to Westfield Manor. The Duke needs to know what has happened." Eliza wanted to protest, wanted to insist she could manage alone, but the words would not come. She simply nodded and let the kind old man lead her to safety, the knife still clutched in her bloodied hands. The message reached Westfield Manor the same day Julian and Victor arrived there from Scotland. Julian read it once, his face going white, then read it again to be certain he understood. "Get fresh horses," he ordered the stable master. "Now, we ride for Derbyshire immediately." Victor was already mounting. "Where is she?" 10 miles north, and she is in danger." Julian swung into his saddle, and together the two men galloped into the gathering dusk, racing against fear and time, and the possibility that they might already be too late. They found Eliza at Mr. Pemberley's cottage, sitting in a wooden chair by the fire with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The cut on her hand from the knife had been bandaged. Her face bore a fresh bruise from the Earl's strike, but she was alive, and when she looked up at the sound of the door opening, Julian felt something loosen in his chest that had been clenched tight since reading her goodbye letter. Then Victor stepped through the doorway behind him. For a moment, Eliza simply stared, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. It could not be. Victor was dead. She had mourned him for 3 years. This had to be exhaustion, trauma, some cruel hallucination conjured by her desperate mind. "Eliza," Victor whispered, his voice breaking on her name. She stood on shaking legs, the blanket falling to the floor. "No, you are not real. You cannot be real. I am here, little sister. I am alive. I am so sorry. I am so desperately sorry." Victor crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Eliza remained rigid for a heartbeat, 2, unable to accept it. Then she felt the solid warmth of him, heard his heartbeat, smelled the familiar scent of him beneath smoke and travel dust, and something inside her shattered completely. She sobbed. Great, wrenching sobs that tore from somewhere deep and wounded. She clutched at her brother's shirt as though he might disappear if she loosened her grip. Victor held her, his own tears falling into her hair, whispering apologies and reassurances in a steady stream. Julian and Mr. Pemberley quietly withdrew to give them privacy. In the small kitchen, the elderly man poured whiskey into 2 glasses and handed one to Julian. "She has been through hell, that girl," Mr. Pemberley said quietly. "When I heard her screaming tonight, when I saw that devil and his men forcing their way in, I confess I was prepared to shoot. I am too old to care about consequences." "You saved her life," Julian said. "I am in your debt, sir. No debt between decent men doing what is right." Mr. Pemberley sipped his whiskey. "But that Earl will return, Your Grace. Men like that do not forgive humiliation. He will come with legal papers or magistrates or worse. She cannot stay here unprotected." "She will not." Julian's voice was steel. "I am taking her back to Westfield tonight, along with her brother, and then I am going to destroy Edmund Carlyle so thoroughly that he will wish he had never heard the name Brennan." In the other room, Eliza finally pulled back enough to look at Victor's face. She touched his cheek, his shoulder, his hands, confirming reality with each contact. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "They said desertion, execution. I waited for letters. I waited so long. I sent letters." Victor's expression darkened. 3 of them, in the first year. "But you never responded. So I thought you wanted nothing to do with a deserter, a coward." Eliza shook her head vehemently. "I never received anything. I would have responded. I would have come to you, no matter the risk. Victor, you were the only family I had left after father died." Understanding dawned on both their faces simultaneously. "The Earl," they said in unison. "He intercepted them," Eliza continued, fury cutting through her grief. "He controlled everything. All correspondence, all contact with the outside world. He kept me isolated deliberately." Victor's hands clenched into fists. His face transformed into something terrible and frightening. Where is he? Where is this monster who did this to you? I will kill him with my bare hands. I swear to God, Eliza, I will. Victor, no. Eliza gripped his arms. That is not the way. That makes you the criminal, not him. He deserves death for what he has done to you. 4 years, Eliza. 4 years of abuse while I was alive and could have helped you, if only I had known. Victor's voice cracked. Tell me everything. I need to know. All of it. So she told him, haltingly at first, then faster as the words poured out. The manufactured debt, the endless labor, the systematic humiliation, the escalating violence, the night on the rooftop when death seemed preferable to one more day of existence. Victor listened, his expression growing darker with every revelation, his whole body vibrating with barely suppressed rage. When she finished, he stood abruptly and paced the small room. I will kill him. I do not care about consequences. He does not deserve to breathe the same air as decent people. Julian appeared in the doorway, his timing impeccable. Captain Brennan, I understand your feelings. I have felt them myself many times since learning what was done to your sister. But murder will not bring justice. It will only make you a fugitive again and destroy any chance of your sister living peacefully. Then what? Victor demanded. We do nothing while he walks free. We do everything, Julian corrected. But we do it properly, legally, and so thoroughly that he has no avenue of escape. I have resources, connections, and most importantly, I have time. Let me investigate him. Let me gather evidence of every crime he has committed, every person he has harmed. Then we present it to the House of Lords, and let them destroy him according to law. Victor looked to Eliza, who nodded slowly. Julian is right. We need to be smarter than our rage. Very well, Victor said after a long moment. But if he touches you again, if he comes near you again, I make no promises about restraint. They returned to Westfield Manor that night, all 3 of them. Eliza rode in the carriage while Julian and Victor followed on horseback, flanking the vehicle protectively. Lady Helena was waiting when they arrived, and she embraced Eliza with genuine relief. You foolish, brave girl, Helena murmured, running away to protect Julian's reputation. As if he cares more for society's opinion than for your well-being. Mrs. Finch appeared in the entrance hall, took one look at Eliza's bruised face and bandaged hand, and burst into tears. She pulled the younger woman into a fierce hug that smelled of flour and cinnamon. Never again, Mrs. Finch said fiercely. You will never be hurt again while I draw breath, do you hear me? Now come to the kitchen. I have soup warming, and you look half-starved. Over the following days, Victor remained at Westfield as an honoured guest, his military rank and newly restored honour giving him a respectable position. He and Eliza were inseparable, making up for 3 lost years with constant conversation and shared meals and the simple comfort of proximity. But Julian was working. He retreated to his study for hours each day, writing letters, conducting interviews, assembling information with meticulous care. He hired 3 private investigators, men with reputations for discretion and thoroughness. He sent them to Greymore and the surrounding counties with instructions to find every person the Earl had ever wronged, every document that might prove fraud, every witness to abuse. The investigation took 3 weeks, but the results were staggering. Julian spread the documents across his desk and studied them with grim satisfaction. 8 families in situations nearly identical to Eliza's. Manufactured debts, falsified papers, victims forced into servitude or extorted for money they did not owe. A widow named Mrs. Patterson, who lost her home to a debt her husband supposedly incurred, though the signature on the contract was proven by a handwriting expert to be forged. A war veteran named Samuel Wright, whose pension was seized to pay gambling losses that never occurred. On and on, a pattern of systematic exploitation targeting the vulnerable. The wage theft was documented through testimony from 17 former servants, all of whom worked months without payment, while being promised the money was being held for their protection. None ever received a penny. The physical abuse was harder to prove, but no less real. 12 former employees bore scars, both visible and invisible. 3 were willing to testify about beatings, 2 about inappropriate advances they had rebuffed at great personal cost. But the most damning evidence concerned Mary Fletcher, a housemaid who died 6 years earlier. The official record stated she fell downstairs. But Julian's investigators found 2 women who had worked at Graymore at the time, both now living in distant counties, who told a different story. Mary Fletcher had rejected the Earl's advances repeatedly. When she threatened to report his behaviour to her family, he flew into a rage and beat her so severely that she died within hours. The Earl bribed the local doctor to falsify the death certificate and paid the former servants to keep silent. They had carried that guilt for 6 years, and their testimony was detailed, consistent, and utterly damning. Julian compiled everything into a leather-bound dossier exceeding 200 pages. Evidence, witness statements, financial records showing the Earl's true bankruptcy, letters proving blackmail and threats. It was comprehensive, irrefutable, and devastating. He presented his findings to Eliza and Victor one evening in the library. They read in silence, Eliza growing paler with each page, Victor's jaw clenching tighter. "There are 8 other families," Eliza whispered. 8 others who suffered as I did. And Mary, poor Mary Fletcher, she died because of him. "This is enough," Julian said quietly. "More than enough to bring formal charges before the House of Lords. The Earl's title will not protect him from this." "Nothing will." Victor looked up from the documents. "When do we proceed?" "As soon as you both are ready. This is your decision, Eliza. Your story, your choice, whether to pursue justice publicly." Eliza thought of Mary Fletcher, who had no grave marker, no justice, no one to remember her sacrifice. She thought of the 8 families still suffering, still believing their debts were legitimate. She thought of the girl she had been on that rooftop, who believed death was her only escape. "We proceed," she said firmly. "We proceed immediately, and we show no mercy." Julian smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Then let us introduce the Earl of Graymore to the consequences of his actions." The House of Lords chamber was an imposing space designed to remind men of their place in history. Vaulted ceilings soared above rows of wooden benches where peers of the realm had sat for centuries, debating matters of state and rendering judgment on those accused of crimes against the crown or their fellow nobility. Today, every seat was filled. Julian stood at the presenter's podium, the leather-bound dossier open before him, and began his formal accusation. "My lords, I come before this chamber to present evidence of systematic criminal activity perpetrated by Edmund Carlisle, Earl of Graymore, against multiple families and individuals over a period of no less than 8 years. The crimes include falsification of legal documents, extortion, wage theft, physical assault of persons under his employ, and credible evidence suggesting involvement in the death of Mary Fletcher in the year 1803. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Earl of Graymore sat in the accused section, his face a mask of outraged dignity, but Julian could see the fear beneath it. "I will present testimony from victims, financial records demonstrating fraud, and witness statements from individuals with direct knowledge of the Earl's actions. I ask that this chamber convene a formal investigation committee and, pending their findings, immediately freeze all assets and properties belonging to Lord Graymore to prevent further harm and flight from justice." The Lord Chancellor, presiding over the session, nodded gravely. "The petition is acknowledged. Lord Graymore, you will have opportunity to answer these charges. Duke of Westfield, proceed with your evidence." For the next 3 hours, Julian methodically presented his case. He called Victor Brennan to the floor first, introducing him as Captain Victor Brennan, recently exonerated of false desertion charges and representing his family's interests. Victor's testimony was clear and devastating. He described his sister's situation, the manufactured debt, the years of servitude. His voice remained steady despite the rage Julian knew simmered beneath the surface. "My sister was 22 years old when our father died, leaving her alone and vulnerable. The Earl exploited that vulnerability with calculated cruelty. He transformed a debt of £180, if it ever truly existed, into 2,000 through fabricated interest and penalties. He worked her 16 hours daily, withheld food as punishment, and subjected her to physical violence when she dared question her circumstances. The chamber was silent, except for the scratch of Clark's pens recording every word. Next came Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, a widow in her 60s who walked with a cane. She testified about losing her home to a debt allegedly incurred by her late husband, a debt she later discovered was entirely fabricated. The signature on the promissory note was proven by a handwriting expert to be a forgery. "I lost everything," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice trembling but determined. "My home of 40 years, my security, my dignity. I have been living with my daughter's family, a burden in my old age, because that man stole what was rightfully mine." Samuel Wright followed, a former soldier missing his left arm from a war injury. His military pension had been seized by the Earl to satisfy gambling debts that investigation proved never existed. Samuel's documentation was meticulous, and Julian presented both the falsified gambling records and testimony from the establishment where the debts supposedly occurred, confirming no such games had taken place. 4 more families testified over the next 2 days. Each story followed a similar pattern: vulnerability, exploitation, fabricated documentation, and the Earl's use of his title and social position to silence objections. The wage theft evidence was equally damning. 17 former servants provided sworn statements describing months of unpaid labour. The Earl's ledgers, seized by investigators, showed discrepancies totalling over £400 in wages owed and never paid. Then came the most difficult testimony. Alice Brennan and Margaret Mills, former housemaids at Greymore Hall, took the floor to speak about Mary Fletcher's death 6 years earlier. Alice, now married and living in Cornwall, spoke first. "Mary was my friend. She was 19 years old, kind and hard-working. The Earl made advances toward her repeatedly. She refused him every time. One night, she told me she was going to write to her brother about his behaviour, ask him to come fetch her. The next morning, we found her at the bottom of the main staircase. She was still breathing, but barely. Her injuries were not consistent with a simple fall." Margaret continued the account. "I helped carry her to her room. Before she died, she was conscious for a few moments. She whispered to me that the Earl had pushed her, that he had been in a rage because she threatened to expose him. She died within the hour. The Earl paid the doctor £20 to write 'accidental fall' on the death certificate. I know because I heard him make the arrangement." The chamber erupted in shocked conversation. The Lord Chancellor called for order, his expression grave. "These are serious accusations of potential murder. Do you have corroborating evidence beyond witness testimony?" Julian presented the doctor's records, which showed an unusual payment of exactly £20 on the same date as Mary Fletcher's death, noted vaguely as consultation fee. He also presented Mary's letter to her brother, found in the Earl's study during the investigation, proving she had indeed written to report the Earl's conduct. The letter had never been sent. Earl Greymore finally took the floor in his own defence, his face flushed with anger and something approaching desperation. "This is a conspiracy," he declared loudly. "The Duke of Westfield has orchestrated this entire spectacle because I dared to speak truthfully about the inappropriate relationship between him and Miss Brennan. These witnesses have been paid or coerced. The documents are forgeries. I am a peer of this realm, and I will not be destroyed by lies told by servants and common people seeking compensation they have not earned." "Then explain the financial records from your own ledgers," Julian interjected calmly. "Explain the testimony of 12 independent witnesses who have never met each other. Explain Mary Fletcher's undelivered letter, written in her own hand. Explain why your accounts show you are bankrupt while you maintain the appearance of wealth." The Earl had no adequate answers. His defence crumbled under the weight of evidence, each explanation contradicted by documentation, each denial undermined by witness testimony. On the 4th day of proceedings, during a recess before final arguments, Earl Greymore fled. He made it as far as Dover, attempting to board a ship to France, before port authorities apprehended him. His flight was seen as admission of guilt by many in the chamber. The formal trial reconvened and continued for 2.5 weeks. London newspapers covered every detail. Public opinion turned decisively against the Earl as the full scope of his crimes became known. Editorials called for harsh punishment. Common citizens gathered outside Parliament demanding justice. The verdict, when it came, was unanimous. Edmund Carlisle, formerly Earl of Greymoor, this chamber finds you guilty of fraud, extortion, wage theft, assault, and culpability in the death of Mary Fletcher through criminal negligence or intentional violence. You are hereby stripped of your title, all honours, and all social positions. Your properties are forfeit and will be liquidated, with proceeds distributed to your victims as restitution. You are exiled permanently from England and all British territories. Should you return, you will face imprisonment. This judgment is final. The Earl was removed from the chamber by guards, still protesting, still denying, but no one was listening anymore. In the weeks that followed, the Earl's properties were sold at public auction. The funds were distributed among his victims according to what they were owed. Mrs. Patterson received enough to purchase a small cottage. Samuel Wright's pension was restored with back payments. The 17 servants received their unpaid wages. During the investigation of the Earl's records, a solicitor's clerk discovered something significant. A copy of Viscount Brennan's authentic will, filed with an attorney who had since retired. The document revealed the truth Eliza and Victor had never known. Their father's debt to the Earl had been exactly £180, incurred through a private loan for household expenses. But the will also showed that 3 weeks before his death, the Viscount had sold his remaining horses and paid the debt in full. A receipt existed, signed by the Earl, acknowledging payment. Furthermore, the will left Eliza and Victor a modest inheritance. £800 in a bank account that had been closed and hidden by the Earl, the cottage in Derbyshire, and several pieces of their mother's jewellery the Earl had claimed as partial debt payment. Everything was returned to them. The inheritance, the cottage's deed, their mother's pearls and sapphire brooch. £800 would not make them wealthy, but divided between them, it provided security and independence. The scandal that had tainted Eliza's reputation in London completely reversed. She was now publicly recognised as a victim of terrible injustice, and Julian was celebrated as the hero who exposed a monster hiding behind aristocratic privilege. Invitations poured in from families wanting to demonstrate their support. Eliza stood in the library at Westfield Manor one evening, holding her mother's pearls in her hands, and felt the full weight of freedom for the first time in 4 years. Financially free, legally free, emotionally free. The Earl was gone, powerless, exiled. She had her brother back. She had her inheritance. She had her life returned to her. Julian found her there, standing by the window in the fading light. He had been careful these past weeks to maintain appropriate distance, knowing that she now had resources and family, that she no longer needed his protection or support. "Miss Brennan," he said quietly, "I wanted to inform you that Victor has been officially reinstated in his military rank with full honours. He has been offered a position with the War Office if he wishes it, or he may return to active duty. The choice is his." "He told me," Eliza said, turning to face Julian. "He is considering both options. He also mentioned purchasing a small property in Yorkshire with his share of the inheritance." "That sounds sensible." Julian hesitated, then continued. "I want you to know that you are welcome to remain at Westfield as long as you wish. But I also understand if you would prefer to make a fresh start elsewhere, perhaps with your brother. You have the means now to choose your own path, and I would never presume to influence that choice." Eliza heard what he was not saying beneath the carefully neutral words. He was releasing her from any obligation, spoken or unspoken, giving her the freedom to leave without guilt. It was the act of a truly good man, and it made her heart ache with all the things she had not allowed herself to feel. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said softly. "I will consider my options carefully." Julian nodded and withdrew, leaving Eliza alone with her mother's pearls and the question of what she truly wanted from the life she had been given back. 2 weeks passed after the trial's conclusion, and Eliza found herself in a strange state of suspended animation. She had everything she thought she wanted. Freedom, financial security, her brother restored to her, justice served. Yet something felt unfinished, a persistent ache she could not name. Victor spent his days meeting with War Office officials and exploring properties in Yorkshire. He had decided to accept a position training new officers while maintaining a small estate where he could live when not on duty. He invited Eliza to join him, to make a fresh start away from Derbyshire and all its painful memories. "You could have a home with me," Victor said one morning over breakfast. "A proper home, not dependent on anyone's charity or employment. We could build a life together, the family we should have had all along." Eliza smiled, grateful for his offer, but did not commit. "Let me think about it, please. I need time to consider what I truly want." But she knew, had known for weeks, perhaps months, though she had been too afraid to acknowledge it. She wanted to stay at Westfield, not as an employee, not as a guest, but as something more. She wanted the library conversations, the quiet companionship, the way Julian looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. She wanted him. The realization terrified her. Julian maintained careful distance, ever the gentleman. He congratulated her on the trial's outcome, ensured she had everything she needed, and never once mentioned the letter she had left when she fled London. He treated her with respect and kindness, and absolutely nothing more. It was driving Eliza quietly mad. Lady Helena noticed, of course. She had been observing both of them with increasing exasperation for days. Finally, she cornered Eliza in the garden where the younger woman was attempting to read, but mostly staring at the same page for 20 minutes. "How long do you intend to torture yourselves?" Helena asked without preamble, settling onto the bench beside Eliza. "I beg your pardon?" "You and Julian, dancing around each other, both miserable, both too stubborn or frightened to speak honestly. It is exhausting to witness." Eliza closed her book. "I do not know what you mean. Do not insult my intelligence." Helena's tone was gentle but firm. "My cousin is desperately in love with you. He has been for months. But he will never tell you because he believes you need freedom to choose your own path without feeling obligated to him. He would rather suffer in silence than risk making you uncomfortable." Eliza's heart began to race. He said that. He did not need to say it. I have known Julian my entire life. I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. As though you are precious beyond measure. As though he would move mountains if you asked. Helena paused, studying Eliza's face. "The question is, what do you want?" "I want..." Eliza's voice caught. She had spent so many years not being allowed to want anything that the question felt overwhelming. "I want to stay. I want to be here, with him. But I am terrified." "Of what?" "Of not being enough. Of society never accepting a match between a duke and a woman with my past. Of being the source of scandal and embarrassment for the rest of his life." The words poured out in a rush. He deserves someone untainted, someone whose presence elevates rather than diminishes him. Helena took Eliza's hands in hers. "Listen to me carefully. Love, genuine love, has nothing to do with social standing or what other people think. It is about choosing someone and being chosen in return. Julian chose you the night he climbed onto that rooftop in a storm. He has chosen you every day since. The only question that matters is whether you choose him." Eliza thought about the man who had saved her life, who had given her employment and dignity when she had neither, who had spent weeks compiling evidence to destroy her abuser, who looked at her as though she was intelligent and valuable and worth protecting. She thought about philosophical debates and quiet afternoons in the library, and the way her heart lifted every time she heard his voice. "I choose him," she whispered. "I love him." "Then for heaven's sake, go tell him that." Eliza found Julian in his study, reviewing correspondence by lamplight as evening fell. He looked up when she entered, surprise and pleasure crossing his features before he schooled them back to polite neutrality. "Miss Brennan, is something wrong?" "No." "Yes." "I do not know." Eliza closed the door behind her, propriety be damned. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." Julian set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "Of course." She moved to stand before his desk, hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. I left London because I thought I was protecting you from scandal. I thought my presence in your life would only bring you harm and embarrassment. I thought the kindest thing I could do was disappear and free you from the burden of me. Eliza, please let me finish. She took a breath. But I was wrong. I was operating from fear and old wounds rather than truth. The truth is that I have been happier these past months at Westfield than I have been in years. The truth is that I look forward to seeing you every day, to our conversations, to the way you make me feel seen and valued. The truth is that I love you, Julian, completely and irrevocably. And I want to stay here, not as your employee or your ward, but as your partner, if you will have me. The silence that followed felt eternal. Julian stood slowly, coming around the desk until only a foot of space separated them. His green eyes were intense, searching her face. You love me, he repeated, as though testing the words. Yes. And you want to stay? Yes. A smile broke across his face, transforming him from composed duke to something younger and infinitely more vulnerable. Eliza, I have loved you since the night I pulled you off that rooftop. I have loved you through every conversation, every smile, every moment of watching you rediscover your strength. I have been silent because I wanted you to be free, to choose your path without any pressure from me. But if you are choosing this, choosing us, then there is nothing in this world I want more. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. May I kiss you? Please. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them aware this was a threshold being crossed. Then Eliza wrapped her arms around his neck, and Julian pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them aware this was a threshold being crossed. Then Eliza wrapped her arms around his neck, and Julian pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Julian's thumb traced a reverent line along her cheek as he tried and failed to steady his smile. Marry me, he said. Not a question, but a plea. Marry me, Eliza. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice. Yes, she said through tears and laughter. Yes, absolutely yes. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small chapel on the Westfield estate. It was an intimate ceremony, deliberately kept small and meaningful rather than grand. Victor walked Eliza down the aisle, his pride evident in every step. Lady Helena stood as witness, dabbing at her eyes throughout the service. Mrs. Finch sat in the front row and wept openly. A few close friends attended, the families who had testified against the Earl and become unlikely allies, some of Julian's fellow lords who had supported the investigation, and Mr. Pemberley, who had saved Eliza's life that terrible night in the cottage. Eliza wore a gown of ivory silk, simple and elegant, with her mother's pearls at her throat. Julian could not take his eyes off her. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady, but thick with emotion. I promise to honor you, to protect you, to challenge you intellectually, and to love you completely for all the days of my life. I promise to trust you, to stand beside you, to meet your challenges with my own, and to love you with everything I am. The kiss they shared as husband and wife was witnessed by people who genuinely loved them both, and when they walked back down the aisle together, Eliza felt a joy so profound it almost frightened her. Mrs. Finch had prepared a feast that could have fed twice their number. The celebration was warm and genuine, filled with laughter and toasts, and the kind of happiness that comes from hard-won peace. 8 months later, spring arrived at Westfield Manor, in an explosion of green leaves and flowering gardens. Eliza stood on the west terrace, one hand resting on her rounded belly, where their child grew strong and active. She had transformed in the months since the wedding, and not just physically. Her posture was naturally upright now, confidence radiating from her. She smiled easily, laughed often, and met challenges head-on rather than shrinking from them. The charitable foundation she had established was thriving. The Safe Haven House, as it was called, provided shelter and legal assistance to women escaping abusive situations. Eliza managed it personally, using her own experience to guide policy and ensure every woman who came to them felt seen and valued. The work gave her purpose and helped transform her trauma into something meaningful. Victor visited monthly, now Major Victor Brennan, with a growing reputation for excellence in training new officers. He had purchased a lovely property in Yorkshire and was courting a widow named Margaret, a kind woman who made him smile in ways Eliza had not seen since before the war. Mrs. Finch remained as head cook, now overseeing a staff of 4 and constantly preparing treats for the anticipated baby. She had already knitted 6 blankets and was working on a 7th. The terrace garden had been Eliza's project. She had worked with the head gardener to create a space filled with herbs and flowering plants, a peaceful spot that held no traumatic memories, only beauty and growth. Julian emerged from the house and crossed the terrace to stand behind his wife. He wrapped his arms around her, hands resting protectively over hers on her belly. Their child kicked, and they both felt it, sharing a smile. Strong one. This, Julian murmured against her hair. Takes after the mother, Eliza said with a grin. Undoubtedly. Julian turned her gently to face him. What were you thinking about just now? You had that faraway expression. Eliza looked up at her husband, at the man who had literally pulled her back from the brink and then given her the space to find herself again. I was thinking about that night, the storm, the rooftop, how close I came to never having this, any of this, the life we have built, the child we are expecting, the work that gives me purpose. All of it almost ended before it began. Julian's expression grew serious. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. But it did not end. You survived. You fought your way back. And now you are not just surviving, Eliza. You are thriving. You are building something beautiful from what tried to destroy you. We are building it, she corrected. Together. In the garden below, spring flowers bloomed in riotous color. Somewhere in the house, Mrs. Finch was singing while she worked. At Westfield Manor, safety and love had replaced fear and control, and Eliza Merrick, Duchess of Westfield, finally understood what it meant to be free. The end.